Well, we're back. Matrix Submerged is here yet again, and just look at the weather. The sun is out, the sky's blue, and we're looking at summer fishing. One day these conditions are going to be perfect for us, but as I say, it's summer tactics we're looking at, and that is going to be the pellet waggler. How does it work? What do you need to do to catch more fish? And what are those underwater edges that will help you guys win more matches? Right, here we are then, overalls on, ready to rock and roll. Nice to be back out again, isn't it? Look at the sunny weather.
I think the boss plans for this weather every time we come out, doesn't he? Yeah.
It's frightening, isn't it? Pellet waggler then, massively important, massively important as a weapon in the armoury of any match angler through the summer.
Yes, definitely. For comfort, specifically for my type of fishing that I'm doing with these big finals at very much carp dominated venues these days,
yeah,
it's something for me, if anything. When it comes to learning methods or perfecting methods, waggler's been the one for me. For the last 2 or 3 years, it's been my obsession to improve it to other anglers' abilities.
It's not just how to do it, it's when to do it as well. And I remember specifically seeing you last year up at Hayfield, and looking down the match length as I was commentating, 2 of you picked the pellet wag rods up, and it was you and Andy Power. No one else has done it. They're all dug into what they're doing, and you both picked them up at the same period in the match for a very short period. You caught 2, and that was the difference, wasn't it?
Yes, definitely. So when a waggler's right, there's probably no other method that can match it for the speed you can catch fish, and it's efficiency when it's right.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, most venues lend themselves to it as well. You look at Larford, you know, you look at Barston actually, but it's so shallow that you wouldn't necessarily think it's a pellet waggler venue, but it really is.
Yes, do you think it's carp are that attuned these days to the noise of bait going in, that they know to intercept it when it's a lot safer than eating it on the bottom,
yeah,
and the waggler's the only way of catching them in that way.
So, what's on your mind then? What are we going to be looking at today? What are the key things that you'd like to find out about it?
Quite a few different things. It's because it's the underwater element that we're going to be able to see today that we wouldn't otherwise. So it's the fall of me pellets, of course. I want to see how they're behaving.
Yep.
I want to see the twitch of the pellets.
Yep.
Just what actually happens when we're in that routine of casting and twitching. I want to see what it actually does. Whether it does this lovely flutter that we imagine. I don't think it does, but we'll have a look. And of course, pellet wagglers, how they enter the water as well, which is a massive part of it.
Absolutely huge. You know, I've had the benefit of doing this once before. I did a little piece for Match Fishing magazine for a mag feature a few years ago. Very, very different day. So from my point of view, I'm interested to see how it behaves in this condition rather than just a flat calm day, which is what we were looking at previously. And so there's lots of things to look at. Like you say, size of pellets is going to be interesting as well, the difference in fall. And, you know, does it match? Is there a way to fish the waggler? You know, I've heard people in the past say what you need to do is feed and then cast. Others say no, you need to cast and feed. Some say you're going to do it twice. Some twitch. There's loads of different elements to it. I think a lot of the time the fish tell us.
Yes.
And the key is knowing when to change to get the best out of what they're asking for.
It'd be very nice to have a look though at, as you say, the bait going in and how quickly you have to cast, so whether you could put your bait in with that bait.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or whether it's a bit mismatched. But
so sink rates in particular, that's an absolute key one for me, I think, because obviously fish are going to be following that. So best thing to do is, I think, for us lot to shut up. You hop on the box, I'll hop in the pond. Let's give you guys some answers.
So before we get into the nitty gritty of the technical rig components and how the pellet's sinking and all that sort of thing, first, of course, I want to focus on how the actual pellet waggler lands on the water, which, if I'm completely honest, it's probably the most key point in making your waggler fish properly to make sure everything's working as it should. I mean, there's quite a few little things that I believe I can do to make my waggler land better, to make sure it doesn't dive too much, and also that the most important thing is straightening that hook length out. So the last thing I want is my waggler to land in a heap, to land messy, and just to look nasty for that pellet sinking at an unnatural rate because it's being dragged down by the waggler. So that's what we're going to do to start with. Hopefully it's going to be a bit of an instructional one, where I'm going to do it right for a few casts, and then I'm going to crash it in and do it wrong for a few casts, and hopefully Rob will be able to pick up the difference in my hook length and again how deep that waggler's diving without talking about different wagglers and all things like that. So the cast for me is a vital part in pellet waggler fishing that has to be done correctly. So very quickly, first thing I want to go through is doing it right. So what I want is my waggler to land as flat as possible to make sure it doesn't dive into the water and make my pellet look unnatural. That's a key thing. And to sort of achieve that, so it's very, very important so you don't cast, so your waggler's trajectory is downwards into the water when it lands. If the waggler's pointing downwards into the water, then obviously it's going to dive as deep as the float allows it, sort of, with the weight on it. How I want my waggler to land is nice and flat on the water. So when my waggler lands, it's going to land in that sort of way. And to do that, it's not on its downward trajectory when it's going into my peg. I'm casting very, very flat and quite hard. So when I feather my line, or in today's case, hit the clip, which we need to do to make sure I don't take Rob out with a waggler, it's putting my float onto the water in a flat, a flat sort of shape. So it lands in that sort of shape, but also by hitting my clip or feathering it, it's turning my hook length right over and it's landing my rig in a lovely long line, to make sure I get a lovely natural fall of that waggler, but at the same natural fall of the hook bait, but at the same time my waggler's landing as subtly and is having the least impact, if you like, on the fall of my bait. So that's the key thing that I want to show first, to hopefully see if I'm doing it right and just see how it looks with that camera under the water.
So let's put Jamie's theory to the test and see exactly what happens. So just as he's explained, you can see the float landing softly on the water and the pellet hook bait landing on the right hand side of the screen. Going underwater, we can see the pellet hook bait slowly sinking down through the water column. The hook link is straight, the float hasn't dived, and the presentation is very good. Now let's slow it down and take another look. You can see here as Jamie feathers the line and stops his float, the tip overtakes the weighted base of the float. The float then falls on its side, down to the surface of the water, where the hook bait overtakes the rig, straightening it out and landing softly onto the surface of the lake.
Well, hopefully with those casts that we've just shown, that's what I'm trying to achieve. I'm trying to achieve the tightest line possible, just to cushion my waggler into the lake to make sure it lands as nicely as it possibly can and doesn't dive under the water, which, again, hopefully you've seen in turn makes my rig behave properly. It makes my pellet sink at the rate it should. Next, what I want to do is I'm going to crash my waggler in a little bit. I'm going to land sort of its own accord. I'm going to throw it a little bit higher. So the wind's making things very, very tricky to do, but we're going to throw it a little bit higher so the waggler's on its way down, just to see how much difference it makes in pulling my waggler under the water, and see what difference it makes to that hook length and the pellet bait as well.
For this test, Jamie lets the float hit the water of its own accord without any feathering to slow the rig down. You can clearly see the difference in the depth the waggler dives under the water. It takes me quite a long time to find the hook bait on this cast. I've no idea where it was. That was until I went further down in the water column. The force of the float landing had pulled the hook bait right down. There was very little to no fall at all of the pellet hook bait. It was just hanging directly under the float. This perfectly showed the reason why you really need to be stopping the float before it hits the water. The presentation is far superior and will certainly lead to more bites. And now let's go back to Jamie and reveal some of the findings.
Right, now that was incredibly interesting. For a start, I think the most important thing when you're chucking out with a wag is you've got to make sure that it lays in properly, haven't you?
It's massive, isn't it? And I'd honestly say I've been guilty on so many occasions of being lazy, thinking that cast will do.
Yeah.
And hopefully that's really opened my eyes, because the poor cast that I tried to do that did come out poorly, often I'd leave that.
Yeah.
And I'd think, that'll do, I might get one.
Complete and utter waste of time. You know, I've seen it before in carp fishing. Again, we do it all the time. We call it hitting the clip. So you've got your line clip on the reel. We always hit the clip. Obviously, you're not necessarily going to stick it in the clip on the pellet wag, because firstly, if they're going to rattle off, you're in trouble. But secondly, you're going to be casting anyway. But you've got to stop it. You've got to feather it and lay that line out. And when you see it going out nicely, I was looking at when it landed. For a start, it landed beautifully and softly. It wasn't diving in far. Your hook link is laid out nicely. and it was taking in my head as I was counting, it was taking about 14 or 15 seconds for that pellet to go down, and that's your key period, isn't it? You want to catch it on the drop.
Yes, that's your pellet going in. That 15 seconds is your window. It's why pellet waggler fishing is so active.
Yeah.
Because you have got only that short window, haven't you? How far was on the good casts, how far was the waggler going under?
You know, on a really good cast, it would hardly go under at all.
Yeah.
So you can imagine if you're hitting it just above the water, it's a little bit like we use something called a spom, where you're trying to get it to hit just above the water and come back. If it hits too high, it'll bounce and drop. So there's a lot of force in that free fall drop. But if it's almost been braked and you lay it on, then that's the best way. So just stopping it before it hits the surface, and you did that a couple of times, it almost just lay on the surface and hardly went under. You know, it'll go the float length under, but it was imperceptible. When you didn't hit the clip, as it were, or you didn't slow it down, the float would dive under and it was just useless. But we'll come to why that was useless in a minute. When you cast out and you lay it nicely, the hook bait basically plops on the surface really softly because there's no force in it, because obviously the force has been taken out with the float hitting the surface of the water. So it's literally like dropping a pellet on the surface and it going down really, really slowly.
Yeah.
And it falls nicely as well. So you can imagine when it hits, it's like falling in a curve. So it's naturally got to curve as it's coming down, so it's swinging back in again. When it goes under a little bit harder, the further it goes down, the closer it's pulling.
Right, and the slack of the hook length potentially is.
And that's the key thing, isn't it? Because if you've got too much slack between your pellet and your float, you're not going to get the indication straight away and they can get rid of it. So you might be having bites that you miss.
Yeah, I never thought of that. A bad cast doesn't just present your bait badly by dragging it down, it also makes it harder to see a bite if you actually get one.
Absolutely, and we know how quick they are, and we know how quick they happen. And there's two different things with that. How quick they happen, it can be the second it hits the surface, but not just the second it hits the surface, it's a split second, because it can be in and out and gone, can't it? So It's got to be tight. If it's not tight, then you're not going to get it.
You're not going to see a bite as well.
That's point number one. Every single time you cast in, it has got to 100% going on a tight line, and it's got to stay on that tight line. Now, when you did a poorish cast, and he doesn't do many of them, we had to get him to do these on purpose so we could test it. But if you hit it sort of slightly higher, where it dropped in, then it would plop under a little bit further, and the pellet would come in a bit closer, and that's when you had that little bit of slack, which wasn't great. But the worst one, and this was where it was absolutely terrible, when it was drilled in, when it went in without hitting anything at all, it's buried itself under, it's darted in, it's gone under a couple of 3 feet, the float's popped to the surface. What you're actually doing is fishing in reverse, because you've dragged the pellet down, and actually the float's come back up again and left the pellet down there.
So there's no fall of the pellet.
There is no fall. There was on one of them I looked at it and there was no fall at all, because by the time I got to it, it was already down. Another one I saw it actually happen. You got 3 seconds. So, you know, 3 seconds and 15 fish crash. Didn't hear it.
It's on there.
3 seconds to 15 seconds is only 12 seconds difference, but actually 3 seconds to 15 seconds percentage-wise,
huge.
You know, you're getting 5 times more fishing time when you cast properly.
Yeah, and it's crazy looking at it from the surface as well. That float on the poor cast, it still only feels like the float's under for not 2 seconds.
Yeah.
So visually, it's not a massive difference, but the way it's presented.
But it's the damage it can do in that time.
It's a waste of time, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely pointless, completely and utterly pointless. I think for me, you know, on the odd occasion that I've fished the pellet waggler, it's all in the feel. And we know with distance across water as well, when you're casting across water, you think it's pretty close, but actually, you know, it can be 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot out as well. It's all about what you're feeling, and you'll know when you've cast out. It's like hitting the sweet spot on a golf club. When you'll feel it. You can shut your eyes and you know it's the right cast.
Yeah, it's a sexy cast that feels
Exactly.
tight. It does.
Sexy
It
cast.
is. It makes so much sense, though, because you know, so often when you cast right, you know you're going to get a bite, and that's not coincidence.
So, casting done, dusted and dealt with, let's now have a look at the other really, really vitally important part, and that is the hook bait. You know, we've looked at free baits in the past. We know that an 8mm sinks slightly slower than a 6mm, even though on the face of it it's heavier. It's all about Archimedes' principle, science and all that lark. But what about hook baits? What do you usually use as a hook bait?
I'm a big fan of matching the hatch.
Yep.
I mean, I definitely don't like going too obvious compared to what I'm feeding. I'll always try and feed an 8mm or an 11mm pellet.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan for 1 minute of wafters on my hook, which is a very, very popular thing.
Oh, are you not?
Which I'm dying to see what they do.
Oh, I like a wafter. Why don't you like wafters?
I think In the way we're fishing a pellet waggler today, when it's deeper and I'm trying to fish within feed with a heavy-ish waggler, when I'm feeding, fishing a pellet waggler properly, I feel that it creates too much of slack line between my wafter and the actual hook length. I think it stays too loose often and wafts about too much, if anything. But maybe that's to do with me not paying attention to exactly what the pellet's doing.
It might be just crap casting, Jay, to be honest. You might
very good chance it could be that. But yeah, I'm not, because I feel it just creates a slack line, almost the pellet waggler racing in too much, causing a slack line that way. I feel it happens with wafters as well.
Right, okay, well, of course, the reverse argument, because I love using a wafter, and I think when bites get a little bit tricky, sticking a wafter on and having the drop zone, the bite time, that little bit longer, because if you can slow it down even by 50%, then instead of having 15 seconds, you're having 20, 25 seconds, so there's 10 seconds more chance of a bite almost. So for me, that's where it happens. But equally, thinking about it, they really do need to hang themselves on it. So you might be right about
I definitely agree that they eat it.
Yeah.
That's not the part. It's the seeing the bite principle sort of thing. So it'd be nice to see how it is under the water.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's a really interesting test now. Let's have a look at these and see if we can dispel some myths and prove some points.
So next up, obviously, we're going to have a little play with hook baits and just see how they sink at different rates with a bit of luck. And we're going to start with my least favourite, which Rob has just talked me into, and we're going to go in with a wafter. So I put a nice, really, really visible pink wafter on just for hopefully pick it up nice and clearly on the camera. And I just want to see how that sinks. I mean, obviously they're going to create a much slower fall of bait, which can only be a good thing. But for me, I'm not a fan of the slack line they create. I believe that from the waggler to the hook bait with the wafter on is very floaty about, very waftery, as you'd expect. And although the fish might eat it, I feel that you miss bites because of it. They actually take your hook bait, spit it, and you don't actually see what's going on. So it'll be then interesting to see what the hook bait does while it's in the water with the wafter on.
Instantly you can see just how slowly the bright wafter hookbait sinks through the water column. This type of hookbait without a doubt increases the amount of time that your hookbait is in the bite zone. You do have to be careful with how you use these slow sinking hookbaits though. Keep watching to see what we've discovered.
So hopefully that's the wafters had a little look at to see what they do. Next, I'm going to go on to the proper bit, if you like, what I'd do when I'm fishing myself. I'm going to go through the 3 different pellets. I'm going to go through an 11mm, which in this case are some big 11mm that I use for my bomb fishing. But it'd be nice to see what they do. So I imagine these are going to sink quite fast because they've had a lot of oil on these. They're going to sink quickly. Then we're going to go on to an 8mm, and then we're going to try a 6mm, just to see if there's any different rates when they're on the hook, just to see how they fall through the water. So whack this in and have a look. I'm going to get took out by a brolly at any second, aren't I? It's going to happen. I'm just waiting for it to wipe me out into the water. Gives me £40, we're going to say, is in that net now. So that has just added up. Woohoo! Did we get away with it? I think we did. Your brain's sinking.
The 11mm pellet sank extremely quickly, not a great choice for pellet waggler fishing. Just look how quickly this 6mm pellet is sinking. A commonly used hookbait for pellet waggler fishing, you'll need a very regular casting to keep the hookbait falling through the water. An oily 8mm pellet is a common pellet wag hookbait too, and you can see it clearly sinks slower than the other pellet hookbaits. And this is most anglers' go-to hookbait, a straight from the bag 8mm pellet, the slowest sinking of all the pellet hookbaits.
Right then, Jay, so 8mm are your normal choice, aren't they?
Yes, yeah.
We've got two different types on display here, haven't we?
We have.
What's the difference?
I'm going with treated and untreated.
Yeah.
And that one of them's had a bit of oil put to them.
A bit of secret
Yeah,
boost. Can't talk, saying it more, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, wait.
But no, it just shows that you can manipulate your pellets almost to do what you want them to do, can't you?
Absolutely. The sink on an 8mm normally is around about, I would say, 15 seconds on the hook length that you've got. So remember, guys, if you're thinking, oh, we've got 15 seconds with it, it's got quite a long hook length there. So obviously the shorter the hook length,
well, 4 foot,
the shorter the drop.
15 seconds.
15 seconds, 4 foot. So that's about 4 seconds a foot, there or thereabouts. So if you're fishing 2 foot, let's say it could be 8 seconds to go down there. On a rough ratio, obviously weather conditions might make it a bit different, because if the float's moving as it is in tow, wind and bounce, you know, that'll have an effect on it as well. The other one, the treated one, I think was falling around about 12 seconds. And again, I'm just counting in my head when it's going down, but you think that's 25% difference, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a big window that you could potentially catch your fish with a better suited pellet, isn't it?
So in a fishing situation, would you use one as feed and another one on the hook, or would you always pick the same ones? Because you can mix and match, can't you?
Yeah, potentially. You've got versatility with your pellets by playing about them a little bit, haven't you?
100%. We saw with the smaller ones, 6mm, they go down a little bit quicker as well. Again, probably as quick as the treated 8mm.
Yep.
And then what we did just for an experiment, we put an 11 out, didn't we? And these were big, old, heavy treated ones. Now,
yes.
In the past, when I've tested these things, the smaller the pellet, the quicker it sinks, because of the density of it. So although an 11 is heavier, obviously a 6 will sink a little bit quicker, but you've treated those as well, and they sank really quickly.
Yeah, they're very, very oily, borderline trout pellet, oily pellets, aren't they?
Well, having seen how quick that is, I think they're useless for fishing through the water. You know, they're just going to get themselves down on the deck really quickly.
Yeah, but that's something in the past we used to do a lot for maintaining accuracy and grouping pellets better.
Yeah.
Oil used to be a big thing, and I think that's a bad thing, because you're increasing your accuracy.
Yes.
But you're giving yourself a much smaller window to potentially catch a fish.
Maybe in the wind, you know, to save that spray, they might be quite good. Or if at distance, you know, they'd help with your accuracy as well. But you don't just want to concentrate on those, do you?
No, definitely not. It's more important to have that slow fall than stretch it a bit further and be more accurate. I'd rather fish closer with a slow sinking pellet.
Yeah, 100%. Now, we've had a little discussion about wafters. I quite like to use a wafter now and again. You don't particularly like them.
I hate wafters with a passion.
Absolutely. Well, we've stuck wafters out, and we've had a look, and just like a pellet isn't just a pellet, a wafter isn't just a wafter as well, because there are things that you can do to them, and there's also things that if you don't do something to them, they can cause you a problem. So just have a little look at this. First bit of footage, we've got a wafter that's sat in the pot for a while, it's been dry for a while, and it's very, very slow sinking. Now, you would think that there's loads of time on the dance floor with that it's going to be brilliant, but it's behaving completely unnaturally. And in wind like this, just have a look at this. That's crazy. It's being pulled along, isn't it? It's bouncing.
It's a very, very unnatural form of presentation, isn't it, with a wafter?
Yeah, there's no way on this planet that anything is going to touch that. You know, it's flicking across the surface. If you're a perch, maybe. But you know, you're not going to catch carp on that. Not a chance. No. Not in a million years. So have a think about the density of the wafter. You can change it by squeezing it underwater, getting a bit more water in it, which is what we've done with the next one now. This is what I would think is a really good one. This is falling almost as fast as a pellet, and I think it looks quite good. It's not quite as fast, it's just giving you that little bit extra, so maybe 20 seconds on the dance floor, and the presentation's quite good on that. You're still not convinced on wafters, are you?
No, it's...
Why not?
Because of the slack line they create. I find that because of the slow fall, and because they're dragged into the waggler, they create that curve in your hook length.
Yeah.
That yes, they might eat them, but I don't see it, which that's no good to me. If I don't see a bite,
And where have you got that from?
it was a feature 3 or 4 years ago with Map, and I was out trying to mug carp on a wafter, and several times I'd see it, take it, spit it out, and my float would never move.
Right, just have a look at this, and we haven't discussed this, and he hasn't seen the footage on this yet either, but just have a little look at this. This is a wafter that's sinking slowly. This is what I would class as a straight out of the box wafter. That is what you guys class as wafters that normally would just sink on the way to the hook, and it's sinking slowly, and you can see there he is absolutely smack right. There is a slack line. The line is sinking faster than the wafter itself, and you can see there's a little bit of twist in it as well. And if I actually grab hold of it and move it around, you can see just how much movement there is there. So yes, you get time on the dance floor, but there's no way on this planet you're going to see a bite with that. They're just going to get away with it too much. So once again, Mr. Hughes, you are absolutely bang right, even without going underwater and seeing it.
No.
So yeah, fair play to you. I still think wafters have a purpose, but I think you've got to be so precise with them. You've got to make sure that it does sink at a reasonable rate. And if you're looking at it and thinking it's sinking really, really slowly, actually it's too slow.
Yeah.
It needs to fall just a little bit slower than pellets, and that's when it works. But if it's too buoyant, it's game over.
Yeah, it needs to be enough to create a taut line, doesn't it? As soon as the line becomes loose in between float and bait,
Unless they're coming in from like 300 miles away
no.
and hitting it really quick. Imagine sticking a box of chocolates in front of Andy May from 30 yards. He'd come in and bang it really quick.
On the settle every go.
Exactly. So, you know, you get it. If it was like that, you get it, no problem whatsoever. But, yeah, I think that's a really, really interesting point. So, wafters, be careful about using them straight as they are. They need to be a little bit heavier, and the easiest way to do that is give them a quick squeeze underwater, get the air out, get more water in it, they'll sink a bit faster, and that's when they work. Otherwise, you're going to fall at the Jamie Hughes slackline trap.
Right, so lastly, we want to have a little look at what happens to the pellets when the floats twitch back to you, which is a very, very popular thing when pellet waggler fishing, is that you have your initial cast, you feed over the top of it, and then you twitch your waggler back into your feed to sort of, the way we like to think of it is you give it a second bite of the cherry, so your bait potentially wafts up a little bit and then falls back down, and those fish maybe get a second chance of it. Definitely not something I'm a fan of. I believe in more regular castings, far more productive to get a bite. But it's interesting to see just what effect it has on twitching that float back by giving the reel handle a turn once the rig's straight in the water, turning my reel to hopefully make my hook bait move. We're just hopefully going to have a little look at what movement occurs on my hook bait when we twitch that float back to us, just to see whether it looks nice or not. Right, so for twitching me float, what I mean by that is that now I've just cast in 20 seconds ago, so my pellet now has reached the full descent. It's my rig straight in the water, or pretty much straight. And what I'm after, what a very popular thing is, just by giving it a quick flick, almost one turn of the reel, maybe two turns of the reel, just to draw that float back to me, tighten my line up, but also make my hook bait move in the water. That's what I mean by twitching it. A very popular thing. It allows you to feed again, and that quick twist sometimes induces a bite. So for me, definitely not as productive as actual casting itself. You get a lot more, much higher percentage of bites casting than you do twitching. But the twitch is a part that it allows me to feed more than anything else. And then once that feed's introduced, the twitches took place, I reel it in, I start my cast all over again in that same process every time.
Immediately I noticed that Jamie's twitch pulled his rig well away from the area that he was casting to. In a normal fishing situation where you'd be feeding regularly, this twitch of the float would move it well out of the area. The next thing I noticed was how little this twitch actually lifted the hook bait. In fact, it didn't rise much but travelled a long way from where Jamie was fishing. We think that it lifts up. It actually doesn't, it just pulls out the way. It also spins on the way back down, acting not like a normal pellet would do at all. It seems twitching hook bait is a bit of a double-edged sword. To get the hook bait to rise, it needs to be moved much further. A small twitch to keep the float in the feed area doesn't move the hook bait at all. Jamie's thoughts on twitching the hook bait seem to have been proven absolutely bang on once again. So let's go and talk to him about the findings.
Right then, big question. Is it worth twitching?
No.
No. No, says the man. Let's have a look at what the evidence says. So, in my mind, before I went down and had a look, I've got the float, the pellet dropping, the twitch, it coming sweetly up to the surface almost, and then sinking beautifully back down, identically to the way that you've cast in. No.
No.
Not at all. Not at all, not in the slightest. A couple of things I picked up. Firstly, when you do the twitch, it comes up a little bit, but what it does is it travels a long way that way. So even though you're only given a little twitch or a little turn, it was travelling a good foot, 18 inches.
Yeah.
So for a start, that's going to pull it out of your baited spot anyway. So whatever it's doing, it's not doing it in the right place. Secondly, it didn't look very good.
No.
Really.
That is what explains a lot to me.
Yeah.
I mean, the twitch, it's definitely a time for me to feed. That's what it is. It's a pause between your cast. It allows you to feed when you twitch it.
Yeah.
But I've never had any confidence in catching fish on that twitch.
No.
Because it's such a small percentage of bites that you get during it.
Yes.
And that is exactly why, because it's hideous.
Well, it doesn't, for a start, it pulls it out of the zone. Secondly, it doesn't come all the way up to the top. In fact, it comes, if I said a foot, I'd be really generous.
That's with a 4 foot
That's
hook
with
length.
a 4 foot hook length as well. So, yeah, I reckon it probably was more 8 inches, maybe even less than that. And it travels really quickly. It's like, woof, gone. And actually, when it reaches the top point, when it's sinking back down again, rather than sinking vertically down, it goes in an angle, because obviously it's still chasing the float, because of momentum, and then it spins.
Right.
So
You've
it
almost
doesn't,
built up.
yeah, it doesn't look natural the way it's coming down. So it's not doing that, it's doing that. And twisting on the way out. So if you do catch on the switch, I'll be surprised. So it just didn't look very good, to be fair.
No. Another reason you're not getting many bites because of how it looks.
Yeah.
It's not doing what we think it does, this lovely waft.
No. If you think back to how many times you've caught on the pellet wag, normally it's instantly. If it's not instantly, it's within the first couple of 3 seconds. It's very rarely on a complete hang. And I'd say it's also very rarely that it's actually on the twitch. So, yeah, there you go, folks. Really, really interesting findings. I've learned quite a lot about this. Key things for me are, 1, the twitch is a complete and utter waste of time. And 2, if you are going to use a wafter, which I will, irrespective of whatever you say, but I will still use it. But I will use it knowing exactly how it's sinking, and it does need to sink pretty quickly rather than really, really slowly. What are the key 3 things that you've picked up?
Oh, 3. 2, definitely, that I was thinking then. Firstly, is the importance of that cast.
Yes.
It has to be right 100% of the time.
Oh, yes.
It can't, if you think it's been 2 or 3 seconds diving and coming up,
Yeah.
there's no, oh, that'll do that cast.
Yeah.
It's got to come in, cast again.
Yeah.
But the cast is everything with waggler fishing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Secondly, today, almost with the conditions that we've been in,
Yeah.
is how poorly a pellet waggler fishes in poor conditions.
Yeah, it doesn't present well at all. You know, but what you guys haven't seen, but I've experienced all the way through this, is being out in the water. As soon as my feet are off the bottom, I'm being pulled all over the place, and actually I was being dragged up that way. If I hadn't got weight on, I was going really, really quickly, and Jay was having to change where he was casting to keep up with me floating, which is daft. Now, exactly the same thing's happening with the float as well. So the lighter the float you're having, actually the quicker that's going to be drifting too. And remember, if it's drifting, it's pulling your hook link. So, you know, that's another key thing. So I think there will be a period with the wind where actually it's just wrong.
Yes.
For the method.
Yeah, it's, if anything, it's probably the method that is most controlled by the conditions that I can possibly think of.
Yeah,
if they're bad.
Little ripple like from behind you would be quite nice, because obviously accuracy is going to be into it. Coming across you is going to make it slightly more difficult.
Yes.
But yeah, brilliant method, but there's definitely certain things that we can do to make it even more productive. Yes. So yeah, there we go. Look, that's it from us. It's been absolutely brilliant to be back out again. Let's have one of them. It's always a pleasure spending time and learning from this, man. I hope you've learned a little bit back the other way, looking at the underwater things, as is always the case. Don't forget, guys, subscribe to us, follow us. If you haven't seen any of the previous films, then up here, or maybe even up there, there will be a link to it as well. And that's it from us at Matrix Submerged. We'll see you next time.